Hi, I'm Kevin Rutherford. Welcome to RG's Talent Tips. Today I'm going to show you how to make change happen. So let's dive right in. Pull up here to the whiteboard and real quickly put this up for you. One of the things that we think about in organizations when we talk about change is that there's really three states that lead to change. There is what we call the current situation, there is the transition situation, and then there is the future situation. These typically in organizations are where we look at change at a macro level. In essence, what situations, tasks, and behaviors are needed to change or shift for the organization to achieve its change initiatives. So if you look here, let's take a look at some examples. And ideally, we're moving from one set of behaviors or tasks to another. So here what you can see in this first one is we have ad hoc processes that we're doing today. In the future state, we want to be doing documented and managed processes. Another example might be we're going to be generalists in HR today. We want to move to specialists in HR in the future. Another example, we're two different companies today, and in the future we want to be one merged organization. So we're moving from one set of behaviors to another, current state to future state. But the one thing though that I see often overlooked when companies are engaged in these change efforts is how the change impacts each employee. Because in the end, change is not unilateral. Some are going to be affected more than others. Take a look at our next slide here. When it comes to really what we call individual employees and their reaction to change, it's really based on two things. First is what we call the current state, which is, if I look at this, how do I do my job today? And then we look at the future state, which is how do I do my job after the change has been implemented? Okay, those I think are really critical because in the middle here is what we call the transition phase. And this is the stuff that really matters because this is what they want to know. Exactly what does that mean for me as an individual and what do I need to do differently than I'm doing today? Is it really is it a tweak, meaning it's something minor, or is it a transition, something more moderate, or is it a transformation where there's going to be significant change that's required on their part? I think the key here is that old adage of WIFM, what's in it for me is what drives their thinking. All right, let's take a look at our next slide. Because what I think is really important here is when you think about it, in reality, the organization's future state is really a collection of many individual states. And depending on the number of individuals that are impacted and really the degree of change for each person is really what determines how big your change effort needs to be. So for example, let's go back here to some of our examples. Let's look at moving from ad hoc processes to documented and really managed processes. If I'm in a role that has very few documented processes, and now all of a sudden I have to document everything, I may be more likely to resist because the change required by me is pretty substantial. Now on the other hand, if I'm in a role that it already has lots of documented and managed processes, then the impact on me is going to be minimal and I'm much more likely to support the change initiative. In fact, I might even say, well, it's about time everybody else got on board. So let's take another example. Moving from, let's say, an HR generalist to a specialist. Now that's a really big move in terms of narrowing that person's responsibility and potentially their impact. But if I'm not in HR, no big deal. So it's important to remember that depending on how each person is impacted, that all change, no matter how big or how small, is really individual. Now here are three what I call key points that I want you to remember. And this is something that you need to think about before you start your next change effort. So key here is, first is that business results are achieved when a project is successfully implemented, moving some part of the organization from a what we would call a current state to a future state, right? That's the key first element. The second key component is the future state is only achieved when individual contributors do their jobs differently. They must do their jobs differently, because then they can make their own transition from, and I'm going to capitalize this next one because it gets more important as we go, their current state to ultimately, all caps, their future state. That's all about me, right? And then, so the thing to think about when it comes to change management is that as the method and process for really helping individuals make what I call a personal transition from a current to a future state. So the next time someone in your organization says to you that they want you to undertake a change initiative, think micro first as well as macro. Because ultimately, I think organizational change occurs at the individual level, one person at a time. Organizations don't change, but the people within the organizations are what changes. So you may be thinking to yourself, if change is individual, how do I make change happen at a personal level? If so, you're in luck, right? Because I want to share with you a technique that I learned years ago from ProSci. And I love it because it's simple, yet very powerful in helping individuals see the connection between change management and achieving business or project results. In fact, it's so good that I still use it in designing the change efforts that we do today. The goal of this exercise is really pretty straightforward, and that is to show the connection between the project, the intended outcomes, and the employee groups who are going to be impacted by the change effort. But this is really key. You want to do that slowly and purposefully by identifying 4 key elements of the change. Because change is never easy, but you can certainly help to simplify it by helping your audience make the connection for themselves. And remember earlier when I discussed the impact for each individual and how it can either be minimal or it could be significant. Walking project leaders and project teams, senior managers, and any other kind of people associated with a change through this exercise I'm going to show you will really help create the aha moments that cannot be achieved by simply telling someone about the importance and the impact of change management. More importantly, I think that the 4P exercise is an activity that you can complete anytime, anywhere to kick off a discussion on both organizational and personal change management. All you need is a blank sheet of paper and the change project that you're looking to implement. So, grab a sheet of paper and let's get started. So what you see here is I want you to start by creating 4 columns. You see the 4 columns here on a paper like I have here. Next, I want you to label this first column Project Name. Project Name. And this is generally the name of the change initiative that we're going to be undertaking. It could be something like digital workforce, global ERP, SAP accounting system, or maybe even something like supply chain optimization. Or better yet, maybe it could be something that your audience has an interest in changing. If that's the case, then have them select a project that they're really familiar with and really one that's really important to them, and then have them write the name of that project in this column. Next, in column 2, I want you to label this Purpose. Label it Purpose. Here you have your audience write down the specific goals or the outcomes that the change project is trying to achieve. In essence, why are we doing this project in the first place? What's the benefit to the organization? So some examples of that might be we want to reduce costs, increase revenue, improve margins, maybe streamline business processes, or even merge parts of the organization. That's going to be this column. The next column, the third column, is labeled Particulars. And when I say particulars, we're talking about specifics here. In this column, I want you to write down exactly what will be changing in the organizations. This is the nuts and the bolts of the change. Document the specific impacts to the business processes, the systems, the tools, the job roles, or any kind of other organizational structures. Because this is that transition phase that I spoke about earlier. And this is the heart of the matter. So it's really, really important that you spend quality time in this column and really work to describe what will be different in the future than it is today. Now, lastly, in this last column, I want you to label this people. Okay, if we look at people, here I want you to identify specifically, and when I say specifically, I mean person by person, who in the organization will have to change how they work, whose day-to-day activities are going to be impacted by this project, who will be doing things differently after the project is implemented. And by the way, you can't say everyone because that's not good enough. You need to be specific, person by person, no matter the size of your organization, person by person. Because remember what we discussed earlier, organizational change occurs at the individual level, one person at a time. Next, I want you to think about this. When we think about this process that we've gone through, hopefully you can see why I love this little exercise. Because the columns in the 4P here, the project name, the purpose, the particulars, and the people, this exercise, and more importantly, the process of just labeling it and then filling in each column really helps create context for what's going on in this project. It ties the project to why it's happening. It also looks at what will be changing, right? And most importantly, who is going to be impacted by the change? Because that's what everyone wants to know. Now let's look here at the next one, because I think here this is really important too. That is, the connection between each of these columns, between all 4 Ps, is really what's key. Because when you use the exercise with a project team, you're forcing them to think about the individual impacts of their project or their initiative. So as leaders and HR professionals, if we do not really manage the people side of that change, it really doesn't matter what specific changes are architected in that particulars column, right? Because they won't be realized. And if the project doesn't change how they do their jobs, we ultimately won't achieve the benefits that we were looking for from the change initiative in the beginning, which is the purpose column. More importantly, the return on investment will not be realized. This project is not going to deliver the results that you or anyone else hope to achieve. But the good news is you'll know you're on the right track when your audience starts saying, yes, we must do something about the people impacted by this change. If you hear that, now you're ready to move forward. So now you should have some ideas and an exercise on how to make change happen. My challenge to you, take action. Think about your next change effort and how you might use some of these ideas to set yourself, your workforce, your leaders, and ultimately the company up for success. I hope you enjoyed this video and learned something that you can apply right away. If you did and want more, please subscribe to our channel below and check out our website for even more content, handouts, and free tools that'll take you from where you are to where you want to be. Until next time.